Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man sa'ara sabilihi ila yawmiddin, amma ba'd. So we continue discussing this particular book that we have started to cover in the last couple of days. And the book is titled Mukhtasar Ahadith as-Siyam. So this is a book that is titled Ahadith about fasting, rulings and manners. And it's an abridged book by Sheikh Abdullah ibn Saleh al-Fawzan. And in the last lesson, so this particular book that it covers points that relates to some of the ahkam that relates to as-Siyam, and seeing that we're looking forward to be fasting the month of Ramadan in the next couple weeks. So it's important for us to cover some of the masahil that relates to Ramadan. So in covering this particular book, that in the last session that we had covered concerning the hadith that discussed concerning the virtue are some of the virtues of Ramadan, and also of those things of Siyam, and also the adab that the person who's fasting should observe, and the thing that they should try to avoid. So in continuing that we'll be reading hadith number 14 that author Ahadith Allah mentioned, and Abi Hurairah anhu أن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة متفق عليه. Then he mentioned وللبخاري تعليقا ما كل وضوء. So this hadith, what is stated here regarding this particular discussion regarding of those ahkam that relates to Siyam that he mentioned, and the hadith when the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have said, if it were not that I would place a hardship on my nation, I would have ordered them to use miswak for every salah, or at the time of every salah. And that hadith is agreed upon by Bukhari and Muslim, and in the reporting of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, that is ta'liqan, that put a suspended chain, he mentioned at every wudu. So this particular hadith that author rahimahullah he mentioned here, and this hadith as he mentioned is a hadith that can be used as an evidence regarding of those matters that relates to as-Siyam, the use of siwak. So of those things that relate to Siyam, is it allowed for a person to use of the siwak? So this particular hadith that is mentioned is a hadith which is general. It is not specific regarding Ramadan or outside Ramadan. So based upon this, of the ulama who have used this particular hadith and others hadith that are similar regarding the permissibility for one to use of miswak or the siwak while fasting. So from this particular hadith that there are certain of those masahil that relates to as-siwak, that one of those things that are encouraged is the use of siwak as a method for one to clean off one's mouth. So the siwak, its purpose is for cleansing of the teeth and the mouth by the Muslim in general. So the ulama have mentioned that regarding the use of siwak, that at certain times it is mustahab. So at certain times it is very encouraged for a person to use of miswak. So of those times they mention, as mentioned hadith, in the kulli salat. So at the time of salat, so before the person starting his salat, for the use of the miswak. So for every salat, so it means 5 times regarding the compulsory salat and also the nafila salat. So they mention in the kulli salat, this will include the compulsory salat and also the non-compulsory salat. So it is permissible for the one before the salat that they will use of the miswak or siwak to clean off their mouth using concerning this twig that is used for as a mouth cleaner. So that's going to show the hadith it shows regarding for every salat, and this will be for every salat including Ramadan and outside Ramadan. This will include Ramadan and outside Ramadan, and that's the as there's no clear distinction regarding Ramadan and outside Ramadan. So the hadith is taken for its general meaning. Then I mentioned some narration, I mentioned ma kulli wudu, and also some narration mentioned with kulli wudu. So regarding of those times, that is highly encouraged for the use of the siwak or cleansing of the teeth, that for every salat, whether those salat is the nafila salat or the compulsory or the non-compulsory salat. Also at the wudu, at the time of wudu, so before wudu, for the person use of miswak. Also another time regarding concerning if there's any changes that a person feel in his mouth, then a person also can use of the miswak. So the person, and they mention that these changes that a person may have, that may experience regarding in his mouth, that either it because of the person I've spoken is speaking too much. So this change of the person's breath and the smell of his mouth. Also, it can occur because of the person's lack of eating for a long time. So a lack of eating for a long time, then it also can change the person's breath. And also it can occur, so that's concerning of those times and other reasons. So either the person not speaking for a long time, eating also of certain things can cause a change of the person's breath or the smell of the person's mouth. So these are the things that if those things occur, then the person can use of the person making use of miswak. And also they mention of those times that are encouraged that for the person using miswak at the time of istiqadha min al-nawm, the person awaking from any type of sleep. So this is where the person wakes from any sleep, whether during the night or during the day, then the person after awaking, then the person can use of miswak. And also dukhul al-manzil or al-bayt. Upon entering a person's out, especially the person who's married, that before entering of his house, that he use of the miswak. So these are those times that it's encouraged regarding the use of the miswak, and other times, but also in general, the hadith indicates that the person can use of miswak regarding any salat, and based upon those other times that I mentioned, that it will apply to Ramadan and outside Ramadan. So the use of miswak is mentioned there. So the ulama mentioned regarding of the discussion regarding between the ulama is regarding the use of miswak regarding siyam. So regarding the person who's fasting, is it allowed for the person to use of the miswak? On this particular matter, they find is that the ulama who have mentioned that it is permissible. So concerning the ulama, I've mentioned it is permissible that the use of miswak. Then you find of the ulama who kind of mention that it is allowed, but it is disliked to be done after zawal. Zawal meaning midday. So if the person is fasting, then they mention after midday, then it is disliked for the person to use of the miswak. Because they mentioned a person regarding that the khuluf concerning, as mentioned before, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved the smell of the person's mouth or the breath of the person who fasts. So they mentioned that for the person to maintain this and to have this, then it's the person avoid using of miswak after midday. But there's no clear hadith that restrict or forbid or give encouragement regarding the use of miswak while fasting. So the hadith that are mentioned are the hadith that are general regarding the permissibility, and also at times that is highly encouraged for the person to use of the miswak. So those apply for Ramadan and outside Ramadan. So that's concerning those matters. So mention of those ulama or restricted to after zawal, after midday, that they mention it is something which is disliked to be used. So you find concerning of those of the ulama who all that you know it is permissible at any time. This is concerning Ramadan or outside Ramadan, of those who have that view. So whether before midday or after midday. So whether before midday or after midday, that they all that it is permissible and mubah for a person to use of the miswak. And the general use of the miswak is something which is mustahab. As in the hadith mentioned, لَوْلَا أَنْ أَشُكْ عَلَى أُمَّتِي لَأَمُرْتُهُمْ بِالسِّوَاكِ. So it is not something which is deemed to be it is not something which is deemed to be compulsory, as Islam didn't intend to make things hard, put a hardship on his ummah. So it is something which is that is something that is highly encouraged to be done concerning the use of the miswak regarding the kulli salat, regarding for every salat. But as for the person having good hygiene, concerning all hygiene, it is something which is generally to be done. So regarding oral hygiene for the Muslim, then it is something the Muslim should not neglect, and something which is of the general cleanse that the Muslim should pay attention to. But it's at least regarding concerning that the use of miswak regarding every salah. So it's not compulsory regarding the use of miswak regarding every salat, which will be concerning which is the compulsory and the non-compulsory salat. So from this of the ulama, all that is something which is advised that it is allowed to be done, and is concerning of the view of the Hanafiya, also the view of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi, also Ash-Shawkani, and of the ulama of contemporary time, Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, and also Sheikh Albani, and also Ibn Uthaymeen, alayhim rahmatullah tabarak wa ta'ala. So of those ulama who are of that view regarding that it is permissible to be used at any time. And next matter that stems from this is regarding concerning the use of other things. So of those things the ulama would mention this amongst those things which is mubah, of those things that are mubah, while for permissible to be done is the personal that the use of the miswak. By extension of the ulama also discuss a matter regarding the use of toothpaste. So what we have today concerning a toothpaste, is this allowed to be done? So I said by way of, if the miswak is allowed, then also the toothpaste they give allowance, where the person do not allow anything to be swallowed. So the toothpaste can be used, but the person not to swallow anything from it. So that's concerned, that's as I mentioned, a general permissibility, and that's the view taken by of contemporary Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen regarding, and also Mujma al-Fiqh al-Islamiyya. So also the fatwa of Mujma al-Fiqh al-Islamiyya, that is a body that give ruling on certain matters. So of those who owe the permissibility regarding the use of toothpaste, we will say with the condition the person does not swallow, not to swallow. Also by this concerning that use of alcohol, regarding that thing that is put on the eyes. Also they mentioned that the ulama have mentioned concerning the Hanafiya, and also the Shafi'iyya, and also the view of Ibn Taymiyyah, Shawkani, Sheikh bin Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, and Sheikh Albani, that it is permissible to use for a person who's fasting. As I mentioned regarding concerning that things that go into the body, that if it's by way of the mouth or by nose, and also for the purpose of that goes into the stomach, with the intent of it and serve as a form of food supplement, then this is of those things that nullify the person's siyam. Those are the things that would nullify the person's siyam. So the use of kuhl, those things that is put that is used for the eyes, then I mentioned it can be done. And by this, they mentioned concerning that isti'mal qatul ayn, regarding concerning of said eye drops. So is it then allowed, as we mentioned, that the kuhl can be used? Can eye drops be used? Can eye drops be used? You find some ulama that in discussing this matter, that you find concerning the Hanafiya, the Shafi'iyya, Sheikh bin Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, that they have the view that eye drops can be used. Eye drops can be used. As it's not considered to be something that, a food supplement type of thing. So they mention that, of those who give the permissibility that it can be used. And also they mention regarding, the same thing regarding drops for the ears. So regarding eardrops, there's also, can this be used? Of those of the ulama who give permissibility of the ulama, and amongst them we find Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, also of contemporary Ibn Uthaymeen, and also Sheikh bin Baz, alayhim rahmatullah tabaraka ta'ala, that they owe that these type of drops regarding eye and eardrop, that they can be used. And next matter is discussed regarding concerning of those things, that regarding shamatib, that the person smelling things of fragrance. So can a person, for example, while fasting, use of bukhur? So of that fragrance that they use in the house, or sometime in the masajid at times, can this also be used during the time of Ramadan? And for the person who is fasting, will this interfere or affect the person's siyam? So smelling of these things, does it nullify the person siyam? Clear regarding what we're discussing? So from the ulama, they discuss them, yajuz. So they mentioned concern that it is permissible for a person to make use of or to smell of these things, for the person, whether in his home or in the masajid or the likes. But you have those who are concerned, that of those concerned that it is disliked. So there's a second view that takes the position that it is disliked to concern the person smelling of things of that type, regarding things of tib, things of fragrance, for the person who's fasting. And the view held by the Shafi'iyya and others, but concerning the general view of the Imma, that they give permissibility regarding the smell of things of fragrance. So mentioned that al-bukhur, that is sometime burnt in the house or in the masajid, that this also doesn't impact on the person's siyam, but you have of the ulama who mentioned something which is disliked. Of those who mention that is something which is disliked. So you find that there's a book that is translated into English by Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, regarding some of the ahkam of siyam. So there's a book that has been translated into English by Ibn Uthaymeen that discuss some of the ahkam of siyam, and of those things that he mentioned regarding of those things that he says that to avoid is smelling of fragrance, bukhur and the likes. But says no, that view, yes, it's a view taken by some of the ulama, but the majority all, that's not the case. majority hold that it is permissible and not something which is disliked. So those are in general regarding that particular hadith, regarding of those things that is allowed to be used regarding certain things. So the general rule regarding of those things that nullify the person's siyam, that one must have a dalil. So if a person said this thing, it nullifies, it breaks your fast, then the person is upon them to produce dalil, clear evidence that state in the Sharia that this thing nullifies the person's fast. And this matter is tawqifiyya. So this matter is somewhat that we only accept what is nullifiers of siyam based upon evidence that have reached us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or by his Prophet or ijma. So those are the sources that will decide as to what is said to be things that nullify one siyam. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, we go to the hadith. So we have covered concerning that particular hadith, and we'll go to the hadith that follows. We go to the hadith which follows, which is hadith number 14. Sahih. So I mentioned concerning that hadith relations to regarding the effects of vomiting. So this hadith is to discuss concerning matters that relates to al-qay, which is vomiting, regarding a person who's fasting. So what are the rules relating to this? Then he mentioned the author, Hafidullah, Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he mentioned, أن أبي هريرة تعالى عنه قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام من ذرعه القي فليس عليه قضاء ومن استسقى فليقضي. رواه أبو داود والترمذي وابن ماجه وأحمد ورواته ثقات. رواته ثقات. There's like a typo error in Arabic mentioned. But overall concern, I mentioned this hadith regarding concerning that rawatuhu thiqat, mentioned thaqat. So there's a tashdid upon the qaf regarding thiqat, which is a typo error, which should be thiqat without that tashdid. Then I mentioned regarding, so this particular hadith that is mentioned regarding of those things that is discussed between the ulama based upon a hadith that have been mentioned regarding what's the hukum regarding the person regarding vomiting while fasting. What is the hukum regarding vomiting for the person who is fasting? Does this impact upon the person's siyam or not? So based upon the hadith that have been mentioned, that it gives us the meaning, the understanding, that's an evidence to say, it gives us the understanding that the person who's fasting, that by vomiting, that it can at times nullify the person's siyam. So at times the person who vomits can nullify his siyam. As it mentioned hadith, whoever is overcome by vomiting does not have to make it up. But if he vomits intentionally, he must make it up. That's the hadith that's mentioned. So the one who vomits, it overcomes him. It's not by his will. It somewhat comes out on its accord, not by him. But as for the one who chooses to vomit, then that nullifies his siyam. That nullifies his siyam. So it mentioned that. So from this hadith, you have certain facts. So of the first of those points to be discussed, which is concerned that you find that which is mentioned regularly, that is what is normally mentioned regarding that vomiting, that it nullifies the person's siyam. So the general rule that is mentioned, are known to most, is that vomiting nullifies the person's siyam. And they use this hadith as their dalil. So this will be the hadith that will be used as an evidence regarding if the person who intentionally calls himself to fast, or then it nullifies his siyam, and he is to make up that day, and the person who the vomit kind of somewhat unintentionally, he vomits, based upon a vomit, it comes out on its own, then such a person, his siyam is still valid. His siyam is still valid. The first thing regarding this particular hadith, or of those things to take into account regarding this particular hadith, as mentioned, that they mention this hadith, Rawahu Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Ahmed, and they mention Rawatuhu Thiqat. So after I mentioned that the hadith is narrated by Abu Dawood in his Sunan, At-Tirmidhi in his Jama', Ibn Majah in his Sunan, and also Ahmed in his Musnad, and also mention Rawatuhu Thiqat. The statement Rawatuhu Thiqat, then this is from Imam Ad-Daraqutni. That statement is from Daraqutni. Regarding Rawatuhu Thiqat, that is from Imam Ad-Daraqutni, one of the ulama of hadith. As for the hukum of the hadith, there's a discussion regarding of the ulama who pointed concerning amongst them concerning that that ulama have discussed that this particular hadith that I mentioned, that even though the apparent hadith seems to be authentic, the hadith from what the isnad, it seems that everything is in place, but the ulama of hadith that they have mentioned that there are certain undetected or not easily detected errors in this hadith. There's errors in this hadith that is not easily detected. And by this they call it, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah have somewhat dismissed this hadith. So Imam Bukhari, amongst those who have dismissed concerning that, I highlight that this hadith is not authentic. Imam al-Bukhari, and as mentioned by At-Tirmidhi on him, who's one of his students, so Imam At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah, one of the students of Imam Bukhari, that I've highlighted that Imam qal, La arahu mahfuzan. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, La urahu mahfuzan. That I do not see the hadith as being like mahfuz, being authentic. Nam, the general meaning, that is not authentic, as mentioned by Tirmidhi upon Bukhari. Also Ahmad rahimahullah, I've mentioned regarding this particular hadith, he mentioned, Laysa min hadha shay. That he mentioned the hadith is it meaning of no value. Laysa min hadha shay. That this hadith is of no value. Nam, no consequence. And also Al-Khattabi, that he mentioned that Khattabi rahimahullah mentioned that what is meant by this by Ahmed, yurid annahu ghayr mahfud. What he meant by the statement, laysa min hadha shay. What Khattabi, he mentioned that what is meant by this by Ahmed, annahu ghayr mahfud. It is not something which is authentic or valid. وقال Muhanna and Ahmed. So one of the narrators, Muhanna, of those who asked Ahmed rahimahullah different questions concerning sawalat. So we find that Imam Ahmed rahimahullah had many students, and his students will ask him questions. Amongst them, Muhanna. So Muhanna have these questions that he posed to Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. We mention حدث به عيسى وليس هو في كتابه. Then he mention ليس هو من حديثي. So kind of somewhat kind of dismiss this hadith regarding one of the narrators who's Isa. So this particular hadith, and also you find Ad-Darami, one of the ulama of hadith, also Imam Ad-Darami, that also they kind of somewhat question this particular hadith. So you find several of the ulama who have questioned this particular hadith. So from this kind of somewhat, the ulama kind of somewhat have concluded that also that Ad-Daraqutni, all the hadith to be da'if. Ad-Daraqutni also, as mentioned by Ibn al-Muflih, and Ad-Daraqutni Tarhif al-Hadith. So you find that of the ulama, who have many of the ulama, Ahmed, Bukhari, Daraqutni, Ad-Darami, and others who have somewhat criticized this hadith. So they have criticized the hadith in the sense of, highlight and the hadith is not authentic. Nam, going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Clear? So this hadith that with his fame that are well known to most, that the hadith is somewhat criticized by many of the ulama. And Bukhari rahimahullah is more towards the hadith is mawquf. That this particular narration is not a hadith upon the Prophet Islam, but what is more correct, that is an athar, going back to Abu Hurairah anhu. So one of the statements of Abu Hurairah anhu, not that is a statement of the Prophet Islam. So that's concerning that particular matter. So based upon this, the hadith, we said that is question regarding its authenticity, going back to the Prophet Islam, and that of the ulama of them, that they kind of more inclined of that Bukhari, كأنه يرى صحة الموقوف على أبي هريرة رضي عنه, that Bukhari all hadith to be a statement of Abu Hurairah, and not that of a statement of the Prophet ﷺ. So based upon this, that you'll find that the discussion regarding concerning that, as the hadith mentioned, that regarding vomiting is of two types. It falls into two categories. Vomit that occur where the person himself intentionally cause himself to vomit. And the second scenario, the person that it comes up on his own accord. It's not by his action. So it comes out on its own. In that case, the second scenario, the vomit comes out on its own accord. Then this does not nullify the person's siyam. So if it was to occur, it's for the person to just wash his mouth out after he has vomited and just continue to fast. And he does not make up that day, or it doesn't change is fasting for that day. So nothing changed for that in that scenario. Concerning that making wudu, that mentioned that's our next matter. You understand? But regarding concerning that, so that if the person make wudu, la bas. But regarding concerning that, in the case concerning that, does it regarding concerning its siyam, is it broken or not? As for siyam, it is still valid if it comes up on its own. So it was something that he intentionally caused to happen, that the vomit, it just comes out on its own. Now, so the person, that scenario, then a person, he just wash his mouth, clean up himself, and then the person does continue to fast that day, nor does he need to make up that day. And that day is still going to be a valid day of siyam. That's that scenario. As for the second scenario, which is the one that is more on a discussion between ulama, is if that person intentionally caused himself to vomit, to throw up. Does this nullify his siyam or not? Based upon the hadith that we just mentioned, that it does. Based upon this hadith, that it does. So you find that based upon this hadith, many of the ulama who are inclined towards that view, that many of the ulama, that they have taken the view the person who intentionally caused himself to vomit, putting his hand in his mouth, or smelling of something, or whatever he may do, or that person may do to cause himself to vomit, then I mentioned that majority of the ulama is of the view that that person's fast is invalid. And based upon the hadith, he has to make up that day. So his fast is deemed to be one, invalid, and second thing, the person have to make up that day. That's the view of majority. To the extent they said it's not Ibn Mundhir, rahimahullah, that he mentioned is the ijma on this. Ibn Mundhir, he mentioned that regarding concerning that butlan ala butlan as-sawm bita'ammud al-qay, that for the person who intentionally caused himself to vomit, that with the ijma, a consensus of the ulama, that person's siyam is invalid. And Ibn Qudam rahimahullah I've also mentioned, I've also narrated this upon Ibn Mundhir. And the book of Ibn Mundhir regarding ijma is in print, so it can be found in his book al-Ijma. But a general thing is that ijma, Ibn Mundhir stated there's a consensus among the ulama, that means an agreement between the ulama, that the one who intentionally causes himself to vomit, then his fast is invalid. But that view, that there's an ijma, that view, there's a fi nazar. That view is to be as not as it is, not as said. It is not the case. That's not the full case regarding concern is a consensus of the ulama on this matter. As we know, concern that if it was an ijma, it becomes binding. If we say there's an ijma, a consensus that the ulama all agree that in this case, that intentionally vomiting nullify the person fast, then that becomes the evidence and not the hadith. So the evidence will become the ijma, the consensus, because ijma is a dalil and also has to be followed. So anything that has been verified that the ulama are in agreement on that matter, then it becomes upon us to follow. We cannot challenge that ijma, as it is one of the established form of evidence that is agreed upon by the ummah. But also that even so, the thing is to verify, is there an ijma as mentioned by Ibn Mundhir? So it is mentioned regarding like Musannif Abdul Razak, that he have mentioned regarding of the ulama, they mentioned that it's the qawl of Ibn Abbas, of some of the ulama that mentioned that al-qay la yuftir, that concern the person who vomits, it does not break his fast, and that even intentionally it does not nullify his siyam. So the view of the ulama that the person who intentionally vomits, this does not nullify his siyam. Of those who of that view, Ibn Abbas, Abu Hurairah, and Ibn Mas'ud, and those are from the Sahaba. So we cannot dismiss those views. Now, so the claim that there's an ijma, then they show that that's not the reality of as to those who claim that there's an ijma, and that's the evidence to say that fasting is broken by the person vomiting intentionally. So based upon mention that there's a statement from that on those of the Sahaba, and also you find that Ikrimah also is of that view. Also you find Imam Bukhari seems to be inclined towards this view. So he shows regarding also Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, I mentioned a riwayah and Imam Malik. So he showed that they are amongst the ulama who of the view that vomiting intentionally does not break one's fast. Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Abu Hurairah, Ikrimah, a view of Imam Bukhari, inclination of Imam Bukhari from what is apparent one, and also a riwayah Imam Malik. So with all of that, we cannot say din ijma, a consensus. And so based upon this concern, it goes back to the dalil. It goes back to the evidence, which is there's no clear dalil regarding breaking, vomiting intentionally or unintentionally nullifies your siyam. So that's concerning that particular matter. So you show that that's a particular. So the matter is left where there is no clear dalil, and by way of a hadith which is authentic, and also second, that there is no ijma established that intentionally fasting, intentionally vomiting breaks your fast. So that's concerning of those matters that relates to that particular topic. Then inshallah ta'ala, with this then we go to, also they mention, just a month considered, rawatuhu thiqat. Saying this in a hadith, Ibn Hajar rahimullah, my footnote that Ibn Hajar rahimullah, so this is mentioned also in the book of Bulugh al-Maram. So in this hadith also is mentioned in the book Bulugh al-Maram by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. And when he mentioned this particular hadith, that also he mentioned that قواه الدارقطني or قواه by stating that also the same statement he mentioned قواه by mention رواته ثقات, but that doesn't mean the hadith is authentic. Saying that رواته ثقات, the narrators are ثقات, meaning reliable and good in memory, precise in the memory, that doesn't necessitate the hadith is authentic. That doesn't mean the hadith is authentic. As for hadith to be authentic, there's other criteria. That's just some of the criteria, not all the criteria. So the hadith is deemed to be authentic until all the criteria are met, not some of the criteria. So this is just highlighting that some of the criteria may be met, but it doesn't necessitate that hadith, that this hadith also is authentic by all the criteria being met. So portion of the criteria being met doesn't mean the hadith is authentic. So that statement, yes, maybe if as they mention, that person not to understand or take it the meaning that the hadith is authentic. It doesn't mean the hadith, it doesn't mean the narrators, they themselves are thiqat. They are people who are trustworthy and also precise, have good memory. But there's other criteria, other things to be considered or to be looked into in coming to a final decision that hadith is authentic. And this is just some, not all. The next matter to discuss. So you find that the state, even the author, rahimahullah, Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he mentioned, riwayah and Abu Hurairah mentioned, إذا قَا فلا يفطر, that a person who vomits لا يفطر إنما يخرج ولا يولج, إنما يخرج, what is coming out, that what is going in. So after ulama who are concerned to know that concerning that this matter, regarding concerning that, he mentioned that what comes out does not nullify one's siyam, is what goes in. So regarding what goes in is what nullifies the siyam, not what comes out. So that's concerning that matter regarding that particular discussion. In moving to the next hadith, which will be hadith number 15, that is mentioned, that author rahimahullah, he mentioned a lengthy hadith that is titled regarding the ruling of sexual intercourse during the daylight in Ramadan. Then he mentioned concerning that again, and Abu Hurairah anhu, anna Rasul alayhi salam, أنه أتاه رجل فقال, that a man approached the Prophet of Islam فقال يا رسول الله أحلقت, that ya Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I've destroyed myself. قال ما أحلقتك, what I've caused here destruction. قال وقعت على امرأتي في رمضان, I add meaning concerning, I add sexual relation with my wife. So I mentioned وقعت على امرأتي, it's just a pleasant way of saying I had intercourse with my wife. So at times we should have concerned a person use certain words not to be too explicit. So at times, not to be explicit, especially speaking especially when you're talking to the person, like he was talking to the Prophet ﷺ, so in trying to be as polite as much as possible. So he mentioned that وَقَعْتُ عَلَى إِمْرَتِي فِي رَمَضَانِ. Then he mentioned قال أَلْ تَسْتَطِيعُ أَن تُعْتِقْ رَقَبَةً. Then the Prophet ﷺ said to the person, are you able to free a slave? قال لا. The person said, no, I'm not. قال أَلْ تَسْتَطِيعُ أَن تَصُومَ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. Are you able to fast 2 consecutive months? قال لا. The person said, no. قال أَلْ تَسْتَطِيعُ أَن تُطْعِمَ 60 miskina. Are you able to provide food for 60 people, miskin, poor people? The person said, لا. قال فجلس. The Prophet said, اجلس, sit with us. فجلس. Then a person sat. فأوتي نبي عليه السلام بأرق فيه تمر. Then a basket was presented with tamar inside to the Prophet عليه السلام. فقال فتصدق به. The Prophet said to the person, then give this in charity. قال or تصدق به. So it was given, he said تصدق, it was given. He said no. Give this in charity. So it mentioned regarding فقال ما بين لابتيها أحد أفخر مني. The Prophet said, there is no one between these 2 mountains that are more poor than we are. Then he mentioned that concerning Medina, regarding concerning the city of Medina. Then he mentioned فقال فضحكت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى بدهت أبيانه. Then he smiled until they could see his teeth. فقال فخذه فأطعمه أهلك. Then he mentioned that, take this and give it to your family. Take this and feed your family with this. And I mentioned hadith muttafaqun alayh. So the general concern, this hadith, kind of someone is concerned that the hadith here is regarding this man, that he approached the Prophet of Islam, explained to him a situation where that he had relation with his wife during Ramadan. Mentioned fi Ramadan, so the person know that it was done in Ramadan, so it comes with a consequence. But the person we mentioned, he didn't understand what was the consequence. There's something, but as for what is the punishment or the consequence, he didn't know. What he know, there was consequence. Then the Prophet went on then to clarify the consequence of his action. What are referred to as the kafara, the expiation for the person who falls into this. So from the hadith, it shows regarding that it's a more severe type of case or sin that a person commits while fasting. It's a more severe thing to be done while fasting, which is sexual intercourse while fasting. And based upon this is something which is severe. So likewise, the consequence is severe. The consequence of this act is somewhat severe. So Islam went on regarding the consequence concerning kafara. 1 is the person able to free a person who is a slave. So the person mentioned, no, I'm unable. Which is the person then, you can ransom, which is you're able to buy that person freedom. So he mentioned that he's unable to do so. So the first of the procedure regarding a person who have done such act, are you able to ransom a person who's enslaved? So that's the first step. The person said no. Then the Prophet ﷺ went to the second. تصوم شهرين متتابعين. The next step is, are you able to fast 2 months consecutively, non-stop? Non-stop in the sense, from the time that you start, you cannot stop. For 2 months, which will be 60 days. Not really 60, but the most 60 days. So the person will fast 2 months consecutively. If whatever time that you start, you cannot stop unless for a legitimate reason. So the person want a break, there's no break in between. There's no, I choose to take a break and then start again. When you start, you have to continue, as I mentioned, mutatabi'ain, consecutively. So for example, the person start, and then 10 days after, he said, I want to stop and take a day out and then start again. There's no such thing. When you start, you have to continue until you complete till the end. So the person can take a break because of maybe he was ill, a legitimate reason. But if I say that, I want a break, then there's no such thing. So the person has to complete those 2 months from the time that he starts, except for a legitimate reason to stop. A legitimate reason to stop. So it mentioned, so that concerned that matter. Then Islam mentioned that fajlis, the mental person, that tut'im sittina miskinan, then a person, if he's unable to fast for 2 consecutive months, then the person, then he goes to the third step, which is he feeds 60 people. So he feeds a number of 60 people, whether in one go or in sets, but the person have to cover 60 people have to be fed, or 60 food provided for, as I mentioned, sittin miskina, so the person provide. So that's concerning, it shows the more severe case regarding a person who fall into this. So from this, it's someone to clarify regarding what is the act to be done in the person trying to expiate for this sin. Then our next matter to discuss regarding this case is regarding for the person who may have done so, does he have to make up, for example, the day that does he make up also addition to this, the day that he did that act in? So for example, the person on that day that he fell into this act of intercourse, does that day also need to be added to the other things that were mentioned before? Clear? So for example, that day that you did that act, that day have to be made up separately. Then a discussion between ulama that's not the case. Not the ulama all that, yes, the person also have to make up that day, as some narration mentioned about making up that day, but those additional narration that they're weak about making up that day separately. So the person, so of the ulama all that, the person with those things of the kafara that I mentioned, adding to that, he has to make up an additional day, the day that he did the acting. But we said that they mentioned that there is no clear dalil that is authentic that mentioned this. Of those who mentioned that if he fasts, then he does not have to make up that additional day. But if he did any other of those expiation, if he fed 60 people or he freed a poor person, then he also have to add to this. Addition to this is fasting. But if he was to fast 60 consecutive or 2 consecutive months, then he does not have to fast that additional day. Clear? What I just pointed out? Then the third view, all that, the person that is only restricted to kafara without qadha, without making up that day. So you have those aqwal, those who mention kafara and also qadha. Those who mention, depending concerning that kafara or qadha, wa fi tafsil. They said the person have to do the kafara, but also you have to make up depending on which of those kafara that he did. And then the third view is regarding that there's kafara bidun qadha, that the person has to make up, do the kafara, one of those kafara, without making up that day. And he takes one that's kafara according to what is outlined, one of those kafara as outlined. So first one, then if not, go to the second. If not, go to the third. Is it by choice or the person have to stick to that order? Is it by choice? Then the person go according to those orders, according to the order. So first he tries, if he's able, free a person. If not, he goes to the second, which is fasting 2 consecutive months. If he's unable to do so, then he goes to feeding 60 people. That's concerning, so is in that order. So that's concerning that matter. You have some other masail that I discussed, that for example, if the woman herself, she kind of somewhat allowed it, didn't resist. He was the one who kind of somewhat instigated, but she allowed it. So if she was fasting, does she also have to do the same kafara? You have a discussion between ulama, those who say no, those who say yes. Those who say no, because she was somewhat allowed it, give her somewhat allowed it to occur without per se resisting, then she become liable, and also she has to make the kafara as he will make. And those who mention no, she doesn't. Then also you have so that's concerning. Then the second matter regards to that case of the person amdan. If the person was to fall into this act out of forgetfulness, the person was to fall into that, then the same will apply that there is nothing upon him. nothing upon the person was to do it out of forgetfulness. If at the time he's doing it, then he stops. So forgetfulness, how it could occur, the person fasting, his wife in the morning was on her cycle, then he stopped. And she washed, she's now clean, and then out of forgetfulness, he and her start to get intimate. So it could occur in that manner. In that manner, or she. So if it was to occur out of forgetfulness, then both of them are excused, as mentioned. So both are excused in that case. Of the ulama, that they are not excused. Of those who mentioned that they are not excused regarding concerning if it was to be done, but the majority, or but the qawl raja, the correct view, that they're excused if it was in the case of forgetfulness, out of forgetfulness, if they were to fall into this act. So this hadith showed concern that that this matter is severe. So you find that the kafara is as outlined, is somewhat also stern. We just did hadith. Then also, so with that inshallah, with those ahkam, then we'll go to the hadith that comes after, which he mentioned concerning the hadith concerning أن عائشة رضي الله عنها وأم سلمة رضي الله عنهما أن النبي عليه السلام كان يصبح جنبا من جماع ثم يغتسل ويصوم متفق عليه. وفي حديث سلمة ولا يقضي. So this hadith that they mentioned here, where the meaning concerning the hadith of Aisha and Salama رضي الله عنهما, that both of wives of the Prophet ﷺ, that it mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ used to wake up in a state of sexual impurity after having sexual intercourse. He would then take a bath and fast. And the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. And in the hadith of Salama, her narration, it consists of an addition we mentioned, and he would not make up that day. He would not make up that day. So this hadith that is used as evidence that the Shaykh mentioned, this hadith is regarding concerning what's the hukum regarding the person, or the situation regarding the person who wakes up, the person who is fasting and wakes up after sleeping, and he finds that in a state of janaba, in a state of sexual impurities. Now, what is to be done in that case? So from the hadith of that mentioned that if the person wakes up and is in a state of janaba, either by way of the person that had a wet dream, then the person, there's nothing upon him other than just to take a bath, for him to pray. So for him to pray, then he has to take a janaba. But as for Isyam, it is not affected by the person who, for example, had a wet dream and woke up in this state. Then for him, and then it does not nullify Isyam, as it is not an act of intercourse. Or the second scenario the person may have, that a person, like before in the night, had a relation with his wife, and then got up. When he got up, he was and he got up late, and by the time he got up, it was still time, even time for Siyam. There's still not daylight hours. He just wash and make up his salah and fast. So his Siyam is not nullified by this act. It is not nullified. And from the hadith, it shows regarding delaying of ghusl. It shows regarding that, delaying, making ghusl. And also the person with a state of janaba, regarding concern that, during the daylight hours, it doesn't nullify or impact on his siyam. It doesn't impact upon his siyam. So the person may be in a state of janaba and still walking around. This doesn't per se interferes or impact on his siyam. It doesn't impact on his siyam. So in general concern, this does not nullify the person's siyam. Does not nullify the person siyam. So I show that so that's concerning that, but also show that that's concerning this particular. Also by this, of the ulama can somewhat include the concern, that from the hadith concerning, ثُمَّ يَغْتَسِلْ وَيَصُومُ, that he alayhi salam, that he was in a state of janaba, sexual impurities, from intercourse he made before he started to fast. then all he did was just take a ghusl and then continue and just fast. And just continue and just fast normally. So this shows the concern that, that Islam, that he fasts while in a state of janaba. That he fasts while in a state of janaba. So it shows that this does not nullify the person's siyam. And the hadith of Salama that mentioned, wala yaqdi, that also he didn't made up anything after. So there's nothing to be made up. So this shows which in that someone to reinforce that his siyam was not invalidated by being in that state of janaba. This also shows concern that we mentioned for yaqtasil, that regarding concern a person who is fasting. Because sometimes some people may have some ideas which is baseless regarding concern a person who is fasting. You cannot take a bath. You want to wash. The day is hot. You want to just take wash. They say you can't. Then that's nonsense. So regarding concerning those things that it is baseless. Regarding there's no evidence for this. And even the Prophet concerning yaqtasil, that means took a full body wash. So it shows that the person can wash while or take a bath, wash their hair, and any part of their body. That these things can occur for the person who's fasting. Question: maybe the person taking a swim. Because I'm saying that obviously the person regarding the person fasting, the person you have the siyami, that the person always try to preserve his siyam. Then taking a swim would not be a wise thing to be done. Because the possibility that person water may get into the person's mouth or through his nose. So those things would not be advisable to be done. Because of the problem that might arise from doing those things of swimming. But after the person taking a wash and the likes, there's nothing wrong with this. The person want to go into it. If they do that, the person just wants just to chill out that day, and a person might go to like a jacuzzi, or just sit in the water, and you heard about they call that jacuzzi, then that also can be done. That because the person actually your head is out of the water. Now, if you go down and come up, that's not a problem. But most of the time, the person's head is above the water. So those things, as the person want to cool down, or the person, then those things are those things are allowed. Those things are allowed, as the water not getting into the person's stomach, through just sitting in the water. So those things generally concerns that show the permissibility of those things. As we mentioned, the asl of these things, the general principle is that siyam, to say that something breaks one fast, it requires dalil, either from Quran or by way of the Sunnah, and the Sunnah being authentic. So we cannot just throw things out without evidence. So that's concerning that particular hadith. Regarding that discussion, then he mentioned the next hadith that will follow concerning that, hadith number 18. Hadith number 18. Or sorry, we finished hadith number 17. We didn't do hadith number 17. Hadith number 17, where it mentioned regarding that, hadith number 17, regarding the ruling of touching and kissing for a fasting person. So concerning that, kissing and hugging and the likes, embracing someone, hugging of someone, what's the ruling on this matter? And author rahimahullah, Hafidhullah, Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan, that he mentioned, and Aisha radhiyallahu anha, قالت كان رسول الله عليه السلام يقبل وهو صائم ويباشر وهو صائم ولكنه كان أملككم عربي. So أو ورواه بخاري ومسلم. So and they mentioned في some concern وفي رواية المسلم للمسلم كان يقبل في شهر صوم. So this particular hadith that is mentioned here, and Aisha radhiyallahu anha, where the narration mentioned that the meaning of the hadith concerning that she stated that the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used to kiss his wives, while he, in a sense, not in an intimate way. So the person might kiss his children, which is that is a father-child kissing. That is not that's allowed. Then the mention concerning about kissing of the wife may be more intense, and maybe more sexually as people might say, but I mentioned that the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used to kiss his wives while he was fasting and embrace his wife while he was fasting. But he had more control over his desires than all of you. And I mentioned concerning desire, concerning that, over concerning that reported by Al-Bukhari Muslim, and in another narration of Muslim, it mentioned he used to kiss his wives in the month of fasting, meaning concerning that he was fasting. Now I'm indicating that the month of fasting, and he was observing Siyam. So from this hadith can somewhat is used as an evidence to show the permissibility of the fasting person to kiss their wife, meaning the husband to kiss his wife and the wife to kiss her husband. Now, so it showed that the permissibility of this, and this applies regarding, no difference regarding whether the Siyam is fard or nafila, whether it's a compulsory fasting or a nafila fasting. So any fast, the person is allowed to kiss his wife, to embrace his wife, to hug his wife. So those acts. So the thing which is forbidden is sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse. But as for touching of one wife, kissing of one wife, then this thing, it is allowed. So the kiss her on the forehead, on the lips, on the cheeks, then the kissing of one's wife on the body, then this doesn't nullify the person's Siyam. It doesn't nullify the person's Siyam. After ulama ordered that salat concerning that matter, it doesn't nullify the person Siyam. And also from the hadith, the Prophet ulama mentioned also the caution that the person also regarding that, if the person was to kiss his wife and there's a form of discharge, the person of a discharge, then of sexual discharge, then that doesn't nullify his Siyam. So the person might kiss his wife or hug his wife, but then there's a discharge, then this doesn't nullify the person Siyam. It doesn't nullify the person Siyam. But I mentioned a person has to be mindful regarding that, and the person that also try to preserve his Siyam, and each person know themselves. Now, because a person that not to start something that they might elevate it. Now, so the person concerned, the person fasting, not to start something that might be escalated, where the person then fall into intercourse. So the person can somewhat to be mindful of this. So one can want to try to take the cautious route and not to put themselves in a situation that may create more of a problem. But overall concerning just by doing these acts, that because kissing and touching of one's wife does nullify the person's Siyam. It's mentioned by Abdullah Fawzan in his share of Bulugh mention, فَإِن قُبِلَ صَاهِمْ أَوْ بَاشِرْ فَأَنْزَلْ فَثَلَتْ صَوْمُهُ. If the person was to kiss or touch his wife, but then he have a semen discharge. So the discharge is semen of discharge. قال ابن قدامة بغير خلاف نعلمه, that it notified the person Siyam, and there is no difference known on this matter. Clear? So you have the person of a discharge of either two types. The person of a discharge is a sexual discharge, but it's not semen. Pre-sexual discharge. Then that does not nullify the person Siyam. But the person of a semen discharge, then this nullify the person's Siyam. According to what is mentioned here by Ibn Qudama, بِغَيْرِ خِلَافٍ نَعْلَمُهُ, that there is no difference that have come to us on this matter, that the person's Siyam is invalid. But the Shaykh mentioned, وَهَذَا فِيهِ نَظَرٍ. But the Shaykh mentioned that also in this matter there is not a meaning that the matter is not as mentioned, is not as claimed. That I mentioned, فَقَدْ ذَهَبَ Ibn Azim إِلَى أَنَّهُ لَا يُفْتِرْ بِالْقُبَّةِ وَمُبَاشِرْ وَلَا أَنْزَلْ. That you find that Ibn Hazm rahimahullah al-Zahir all concerned the person who may kiss his wife or may hug his wife or touch his wife, and then he have a semen discharge. Then I mentioned that Ibn Hazm that this does not nullify the person's Siyam. So that discussion in between, and you have others who have regarding it. So there's a discussion between ulama on that matter. There's a discussion between the ulama on that particular matter regarding that matter. Where a person might touch his wife, not intending what occur, but as mentioned there, a discussion between the ulama on this particular matter. So the safe route is the person to avoid situation like this. So the safe route is for the person to avoid situation like this. And as for those who may hold the view that the person, by doing this, is siyam is invalid, then the person just make up that day. Then for that view, the person have to make qada only for that day, not for of that of intercourse, of the kafara of freeing a person or fasting 2 consecutive months or feeding 60 people. Then this would not apply to them. The situation would not apply to them. The one that apply concerning intercourse to the person, there's actually penetration. There's actually penetration, whether through the front or back. Whether through the front or back. So that's concerning in brief regarding that particular matter, regarding some of the ahadith that the author here I've mentioned in his book, that is referred to as Muqtasar Ahadith As-Siyam by Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan, Hafidullah, Tabarak Ta'ala. So with this, inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop here and continue next Saturday. Wabillahi ta'ala tawfiq wa hadhihi as-sabil. And we started somewhat today late, so apologies for this. But next week, our next lesson that we have will be Saturday at around 4:30. Or just say 5 o'clock, since this Saturday, 5 o'clock inshallah ta'ala. We'll start on 5 o'clock on next Saturday. Wabillahi ta'ala tawfiq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.